I will take, after your brief introduction, I will take questions from the floor.
Okay. So we have some questions for each other, and then we're
Sure.
started out that way, and then
Sure.
get going. And if you could remind us how long we're going to talk for as well,
How long is this?
Yeah, 50 minutes. The session is for 50 minutes, but you
50?
know.
50. Okay.
Uh-huh.
All right.
50.
That's good to know.
15.
All right. Thanks. So yeah, I'm Dean Takahashi. I'm the lead writer for Gamesbeat at VentureBeat. I've been a tech journalist for something like 27 years and a game industry writer for about 20 years. And I've been at VentureBeat the last 9 years. I also run the Gamesbeat conferences. Our next conference is Gamesbeat Summit 2018, April 9th and 10th in Berkeley. And I've written about games for quite a while, and I've written about Amy Jo Kim as well quite a bit. And she's got a long history in games, and in something new she calls game thinking as well. And so we're gonna sort of draw this out of each other, some of our backgrounds. But Amy Jo, you do want to sort of introduce yourself a little further as well?
Sure. So I've been working at the intersection of gaming and product design for a long time, and I worked on games on the original design team of games you might have heard of, like The Sims, Rock Band, Ultima Online, Cuphead Fashion, and also on products that are game-like but don't necessarily feel or play like a game, like Happify, which is a leading digital health product. eBay, I worked with them early on. I worked with Netflix on their onboarding. And so game thinking is my word for taking what is deep and powerful about game design and translating that into product design. I run programs now under a site called gamethinking.io. You can look it up. And we run programs for entrepreneurs and also intrapreneurs, corporate innovators, who want to create deep engagement from the ground up. So that's what I do. I have clients all over the world. And I've known Dean for a long time. And Dean and I have been through some interesting ups and downs in the gaming industry together, which I think you will find quite interesting. My greatest interest today, by the way, is your questions and getting to know you. So we're going to talk a little bit more, but if you've got those pressing questions, please queue them up, because we'd really love to engage with you and understand more about what you're struggling with and how we can shed some light on that.
And I think we're assuming that a lot of you are developers as well, and that you're developing technology for Samsung platforms. You're not necessarily very focused on maybe games yourselves. Maybe you are, but some of Amy Jo's knowledge really applies. It sort of extracts what's good about game design and extracts it for the broader product design that every developer maybe can get some lessons from. So I want to try to pull that out of her. And I guess maybe the question is, when did you first start thinking about this idea of game thinking and that it could apply further than games? Like we know 5 years ago or so, this phrase gamification became very fashionable, right? But you've been thinking about this for a while as well.
Much longer, yeah. So it's hard for me to think about when I didn't think this, but I'd say when it crystallized for the very first time was when I was working with eBay. That was a long time ago. So I started working with eBay when there were 30 people there. Piero Midger still ran it. Meg was in the conversation, but Meg Whitman wasn't yet running it. And I had been working in game design, and I was currently, at the time, working with the Ultima Online team. Do any of you remember Ultima Online? Yes, the few, the proud. One of the pivotal experiences of my life. So I was working with the Ultima Online team. I was actually helping them fix their reputation system. Perhaps some of you ran afoul of the reputation system or the housing system or any of those systems. So I'm a system designer, and I was working on fixing the systems, balancing them, et cetera. And at the same time, eBay brought me in, and they had me working on their reputation system. And also, there was no profile system. The About Me system in eBay, the profiles, did not exist. I helped invent those. The power seller program where you have rewards for sellers did not exist. I helped come up with that. And here's the kicker. eBay's reputation system. You guys familiar with eBay? You know, I mean, it's old hat now, right? The reputation system, their famous reputation system that led them into success. When I started working with them, it wasn't tied to transactions at all. Let that sink in for a minute, developers. And there were these huge arguments internally about whether we should tie it to transactions. Crazy, right? Crazy. But going through that, to answer Dean's question, part of why they hired me to help, and part of the heavy lifting I did, was translate for the execs at eBay why something like a tiered power seller system, rather than just a you're behind the velvet rope and the rest of you aren't, why that would be a good thing. Why you would want to create like a low tier that people could then get onto and then go to the next one and the next one. That's such fundamental classic game design psychology. And then the reputation system, why it was so important to tie it to transactions, how to do that, how to balance it, all of that. A lot of the knowledge that I brought to eBay for those systems came out of my experience with gaming. So that was
games are engaging, and one of the things that's engaging about them is that you get to climb this ladder of achievement, right? And so your thought or connection here to product design is that why don't all products have this, I guess, right?
Well, yeah, and so I think what was interesting is the history since then with gamification, how that kind of rose, and then there was some disillusionment, and now it's transforming into something else. When gamification started, which was probably 8 or 9 years ago when the first bubblings came and then it hit a big wave, a lot of people looked at my earlier work and said, oh, you're the godmother of gamification, the pioneer, we're going to follow you. But my work was really about creating a learning architecture over time, because the way you create a path to mastery, which is what this is not through visible mechanics. It's through architecting your experience so that as your customer gets better, the experience gets better too. And you're not going to get that effect with a bunch of points and badges. You're just not. That's like inviting someone to dinner and giving them a plate full of frosting. It's the icing. It's not really the cake. So
there's no substance to badges, right?
No. I mean, what the mistake that most people make, and that you guys are never going to make again now that you've heard this, is to mistake the visible signs of progress that you can see in the interface for the thing that makes a game compelling and exciting. And they're not the same thing.
So some light bulbs go off in the heads of people that you're talking to. I went to one of your sessions and people were very into it. They're very they're almost reciting some of the things from your book back to you, right? And what is sort of the point you want them to get to, or what do you want them to sort of understand or learn as they go through this game thinking, I guess?
So where I want people to get to, and where I guide my clients to and my students, is to understand the process that the best game and product designers use to test and iterate and bring their idea to life. Not to copy the way it looks when it's finished, the visible elements, but to actually understand some key elements of the process. And there's a whole system, but let me give you 3 ideas to go home and remember, and you can learn more about, you can experiment with. 3 ideas. Superfans, a mastery path, and a learning loop. Superfans is shorthand for high need, high value early customers. Something that most product designers get wrong, app designers get wrong, but that the best app and product designers, including eBay, including Ultima Online, including The Sims, including Rock Band, including Netflix, they get it right, is focus on building something that a very small handful of very specific people absolutely love. Don't try and build something, if you're innovating, that your target market is going to love. If you test your idea on your target market, which is what people are taught in business school, and you're innovating, you're going to get the wrong feedback from the wrong people. The best game designers, and you can do this too, is they focus on a very, very narrow slice of people that are defined not by demographics, but by their need, their desperate burning need for this thing you want to build, and then getting into an iterative learning loop with those people so that you're bringing your systems to life, not with your target market, not with just your team, friends and family, but with this layer of people in between I call super fans. Huge, high leverage, insight, counterintuitive, because a lot of people are like, why would I design for a niche? Why would I niche myself down? Key insight, these people aren't your eventual, who you're designing for eventually, they're how you get there. It's a different thing. That's one, super fans. Two, mastery path. People say, well, I'm just building an app. What does a mastery path have to do with me? Why can't I just stick a leaderboard in there? Isn't that the way to do it? A mastery path is where you think about day 1, day 7, day 21, day 40, day 60. What's the experience you're developing? What is your onboarding? What is your day 21 typical learning loop? The thing where somebody comes back, they're not learning your product, they're just coming back for their fix. What does that look like? How on day 60 is your customer better and smarter than they were on day 1? And how is your product opening up to them to make a better experience as they get better and learn more? That's how you design a mastery path. And to do that, you have to understand not all those game mechanics, but what your customer cares about getting better at. And if you have a product where your business model is tied into ongoing revenue, okay, it's not a fad, it's not a quick thing. You have a SaaS, you want to, microtransactions, a subscription, anything like that. Your bread and butter is sustained engagement. The way to build sustained engagement is to create a mastery path. And then the third concept is the learning loop. You've probably heard of habit loops or, a compulsion loop, those sorts of things where there's a lot of people that will show you how to do that. Here's the thing you need to remember if you want to drive lasting engagement. Learning and mastery and skill building trumps behavior manipulation. If you, as a product creator, say, I want to use gamification or I want to use this habit design loop that I've heard about, and I want to track behavior and then reward people so that I manipulate the behavior and get them to build habits, you are doing operant conditioning. It might work for a few weeks. It will not work in the long term. Take a look at Zynga's game to know that operant conditioning, compulsion loops don't work in the long term. There's a shift from manipulating behavior, tracking and manipulating behavior, to thinking about how can I pull, not push, but pull my client with desire and learning and mastery. How can I make this experience more interesting and rewarding for my client over time based on what they care about, not based on how I want to nudge them. That leads to long-term engagement. That's how every product I've worked on that was a hit was designed. And I've worked on a lot of products that weren't hits that I'm not announcing because you've never heard of them. And a lot of them weren't designed that way. And that's part of why I'm so passionate about these issues is I can see the difference.
So that's Amy's shtick, and she's excellent at it. She's very good. She does this at her seminars. We thought that the combination of the two of us could be interesting here because I have an interesting case study that I would like Amy to interpret for me in some way. As far as I've encountered these super fans, as you call them, in playing this game called Cuphead. Right? So I don't know if you guys have heard of my whole episode here, but I played Cuphead at an event in Germany and a preview event, and I recorded it, all 26 minutes of my gameplay, and I put it up on the internet, and people went bananas. They went nuts. I had more than 800,000 views for this video when maybe 10,000 is very typical for our videos or so. And what drove them crazy was I played the game just cold, and for about 2.5 minutes, I struggled to get through the very simple tutorial, right? It's a very simple thing of all you had to do really through the tutorial was do something like a jump and dash sideways, right? It's a platform game, you go sideways in this direction. You know, it's a shooter, and this sort of enraged people because, you know, I'm supposed to be an expert at playing games. I'm a game journalist. You know, I've been, you know, writing about games for 20 years, and yet I couldn't get through this very simple part of the game. I think I was kind of messing around, but then I went on for 24 more minutes trying to get through the first level of the game, and I couldn't do it. Like, I just couldn't proceed through getting through this fairly difficult level to the next point. And now this game, you know, if you don't know anything about it, it's an Xbox exclusive. It came out on September 29th. It's designed to be very difficult. It looks very cartoonish and inviting and simple because it's done in sort of like a 1930s animation style. But the whole point is to have a set of boss fights, a dozen or so boss fights that are almost impossible to beat. And one of my colleagues, you know, he showed me up by actually finishing the game, and then he noted that in the past few weeks that about 4% of the people who bought the game so far have finished it. And it's been an interesting experience. You know, like, I got a whole lot of haters. I had to, you know, apologize for putting such a bad video up. I also made a plea, though, that, you know, we shouldn't all be required to be experts at games in order to enjoy them, right? So anyway, those are all these details and facts of this whole tweet storm I've had, and I kind of want to shove that over to you to interpret in some way. Like, what does this mean for product designers? You know?
I would love to get you guys involved in this too. This is such a relevant issue for you as app developers. By the way, how many of you are building games? How many of you are building apps? How many of you would like your apps to kind of feel a bit game-like? Okay, so as developers of games and apps, you know that understanding who you're designing for is critical. You all know that. And this is what's going on with this conversation with Dean. In gaming, there has been especially in the last 5 or 6 years, but really for the last 10 years, a huge shift going on to more and more casual games, more and more games that are simple and accessible, games that, like, you know, Gone Home, that are just like click through it. There's not a lot of skill there required. Now, but there's also still very skill-based games, puzzle games, you know, RPGs, you know, combat games that are super hard as well. Some people like really hard games, but it's a much, much bigger audience that likes accessible games. Same is going to be true for you with your products. So what's going on with Dean's story has a lot of threads. One is what's happened to games journalism. So how many of you are familiar with the Let's Play phenomenon on YouTube? If you aren't, you should figure it out. So what YouTube and Twitch and platforms like that have really exploded. Someone sitting in their room at home wanting to talk about a game, wanting to play through a game, wanting to just say, hey, I'm playing this game. Come watch me play this game. Is that games journalism? Hard to say. It's bleeding over into what you're doing.
It's definitely what they call influencers now. And I think Samsung has talked quite a bit about the influencers here, right?
Right. So you have influencers who are not critical of a game. They're not necessarily, do influencers review games? Influencers are more about spreading the word about games. They're really like the marketing department. They're not a separate critical person. In fact, anybody who pays them can pretty much get a nice review. It's pretty clear what it's about. But then you have journalism, which is under attack, of course, from other sides right now in our political climate, which is supposed to be dispassionate, you know, honest, doing a service for customers, et cetera, but it's changing. So you have a journalist being very transparent, making a video that's not necessarily very polished, but that video could have been made by an influencer on YouTube easily. But would they have gotten the hate? What do you think?
Well, I don't think they would have done it like I did. They would have played through 30 or 40 times until they got through and they were very good at it, and they would have captured that and they would have posted that. You know, high quality gameplay is sort of what they would have posted. maybe if they were a live streamer, they would have taken more risks there and said, okay, I'm going to roll the dice here and see if I can, play this game competently while, 1,000 people are watching me. That's not something I do, right? Because, who would want to watch someone who is not so skillful, right?
Well, see, that's the interesting issue. Lots of these YouTubers are very skillful, but many of them are an avatar for the customer. And they'll play through and they'll giggle at themselves. Oh my God, I can't believe this happened, blah, blah, blah. It's all entertaining. It's all very funny. My 10-year-old daughter watches these. She learns a lot from it. But then you have a journalist who's, now, and what people were attacking Dean and saying, you're not a real games journalist because you're not an expert at this super hard game. Now, Dean engaged with these people. He waded into Reddit and talked to them. And here he is alive, surviving that horrific experience. I would never have done that myself. And the reason is, so my interpretation of this is, why the hell do you care about this tiny, shrinking minority of hardcore gamers who want to argue with you about what a real gamer journalist is, and you have to be somehow magically expert at playing this ridiculously hard game to be taken seriously? So that's the point of view that got thrown at Dean. I'm here to tell you that that is a shrinking minority in the same way that, pardon me, white nationalists are a shrinking minority in our country. They are a minority. The demographics are changing. The overall attitudes are changing. Same thing with the gaming industry. I'm a woman. I've been working in the gaming industry for 20 years. Believe me, I've got my stories about harassment and this and that. But mostly I've worked with awesome people and made awesome games. That's most of what my stories are, because I steered around those ridiculous idiots.
But the devil's advocate in me says, like, well, what if I'm the idiot and they're not idiots, right? And it's like, well, you talked about superfans. Like, well, these people I ran into, they kind of sound like your definition of superfans.
Ah,
right?
See, that's where there's a razor's edge that's different. Superfans are, by definition, people that have a burning need for the thing that you're building or that you have to offer, and the ability to give you feedback that can help you make it better. That's my definition of a superfan. Somebody who wants to, so my answer to you is, they're mad because you're not representing them, but your job isn't to represent them. Your job is to represent gamers of all kinds. And if there's, hundreds of thousands of gamers who would have just as much trouble as Dean would playing through that hard intro to that game, Dean, by showing that, is representing all those gamers and representing me. He's not representing this narrow little slice of gamers who wants to say who's a real gamer and who's not based on their ability to play something arcane and hard. And I've met those people. I know those people. I'm not focusing my business on those people because, one, there's a much bigger group of people who aren't them. Two, they're assholes. Three, I mean, I don't care what they think a real gamer is. I had lunch with somebody, she actually used to be the head of product management at Slack today. And she told me, you know what? I'm looking at new jobs right now, and I'm getting a bunch of people from the gaming industry, the hardcore gaming industry, wanting me to come in and interview for, head of product. And she said, look, I've been playing D&D, that's Dungeons and Dragons, since I was 15. I was with a D&D group with Stuart Butterfield, the head of Slack. These people still tell me I'm not a real gamer. And I don't even want to talk to them. So here's the thing, I don't feel like you need them.
But these super fans that we're
those aren't
talking
super
about.
Fans, those are haters. Don't get confused
I wonder
and super fans.
if you have, there were two sides of something here: is super fans and super haters. Like, I remember somebody telling me that Sony's lead product in one of the countries for the PlayStation got death threats because Sony had to raise the price for the machine in those countries, right? Those people cared enough about the PlayStation 4 that they would go and make death threats to somebody who sort of did something slightly negative, right? that's a weird world that we live in, right?
But that's so much the gamer world. I mean, Ultima Online, we talked about Ultima Online earlier. Perfect example. On Ultima Online, we had super fans and we had super haters. The super haters were hacking our gold system, exploiting, exploiting cheats. They were trying to take down our servers. They were posing as newbies, befriending other newbies and then nerfing them and taking their loot. They were doing all these things that made it really tough for us. Those were the super haters. The super fans were the people reporting them, the people saying, hey, you want to conscript us into a virtual army and we'll go get them? Why don't you give us host powers? This guy's nodding. He knows what I'm talking about. They are two sides of the same coin. But again, I want to give you guys something valuable as developers from this. Don't be confused between your super haters and your super fans. The super haters can sometimes be swayed. For example, on Ultima Online, some of our best security experts came from the hacker community. Classic, okay? Not all of our hackers could be dissuaded, but sometimes when we found somebody exploiting something, instead of going like nuclear on their ass, we would say, would you like a job interview? And it worked really well. But here's the thing, and you and I don't agree on this, but this is my advice to you. You have a lot of super fans. Your super fans are the people that love what you're doing, that found it valuable that you were transparent, that jumped to your defense. And how many people jumped to your defense? Many, myself included. So those are your super fans are into what you're doing, and they want you to succeed, and they can be, in a sense, your co-creators. Your super haters want you to be doing something different than what you're doing. And it's very hard as a developer, as a creative person, to say, I'm going to listen to this person's feedback and not this person's. I'm here to tell you, as someone who's worked on 5 breakthrough, worldwide, huge hits, and then dozens that weren't. A thing all those hits had in common was they all had haters, first of all, big time. But we didn't get freaked out by them and focus on them. We managed them, but we really focused on the people that were the people we were serving. And it was one of the hardest and one of the most important things to breaking through to a bigger level. So I'm not saying we ignored them completely. I'll give you a really good example. So in Ultima Online is for those of you who don't know, it's like World of Warcraft 10 years ago. It was a precursor to World of Warcraft. And when we launched it, we had done beta testing with all these super fans, people that loved it, people that knew Richard Garrett's previous RPG games, which lived in a very interesting moral universe, blah, blah, blah. So we launched it, and this was right when Doom and Quake, remember Doom and Quake? How many people remember Doom and Quake? Very big. So we launched it, and then we had all these people that were like, they had gone to Ren Fair, Renaissance Fair, and they would sort of role play, oh, milady, thou lookest beautiful this evening, stuff like that, right? All this thee and thou, and we called it Men in Tights. And so we had all these people, all this culture, and then we launched the game with this reputation system we had tested with those people. Guess who came into the game? All the Doom and Quake people. They were like 16-year-old, 13-year-old, pretending to be older, all these people. The rule in Doom and Quake is shoot anything that moves. That's the rule. So they came in using that same goggles into our beautiful thee and thou Men in Tights world. Boom. Boom, big time problems. Maybe some of you were there. What did we do? Did we kick all those people out? No. But they were asking us for things. They were saying, you should do this. You should build this feature. You should have this. You should have more blood. That's what they were asking for. But we didn't give it to them because those weren't the people we wanted to please. So that's my thing to you is, I think it's the same thing with these, my word, idiots who want to tell Dean that simply posting, hey, this was hard for me, this really weird arcane game was hard for me, people that think that makes him not a real game journalist, I believe are living in the past and wish that they were living in a present where people like them are the majority and they're not and they're pissed.
Well, I feel better, and this has been a nice therapeutic session here, and I think we should let these people ask questions.
I sure do. I see we have a gentleman here.
Okay.
Say, just a sec, can we get you a mic so we can get it on the camera? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Don't you think it's a trend? It's something of the last couple of years, this super hating, people who are very verbal on the internet and on social networks, like a couple of years with Brianna Wu, you know, she got death threats because she said something about women in games. I think it's a trend. It's something that people find cool.
I mean, it's been encapsulated in this phrase Gamergate, right? And that has been going on for a couple of years, and yeah, it's been fairly relentless and you know, very unmerciful in the games industry, for sure.
You know, I think it's a cyclic thing. I agree with you. It is a trend, but it's not new any more than VR is new. You know, but I think it cycles back and forth. What's happened with Gamergate is it got a name, it got a meme, and it. Let's talk about Milo, Dean. Milo and Gamergate. So there's. How many of you know who Milo Yiannopoulos is? That his name?
Yeah.
So there's a very weird, interesting confluence between Milo and Gamergate and trends. Why don't you tell us a little about that?
Let's see. So Milo wrote, sort of was an unknown journalist at Breitbart for a while, and he wrote a story about a conspiracy among game journalists who would talk to each other and try to, say, influence review scores, or, you know, talk about problem people in the industry, or show their biases against other people. I was part of this this network of game journalists, and it was a network of game journalists talking about freelance assignments and talking about things like this. Milo went through, like, somebody gave Milo all of the transcripts of this whole sort of history of this networking group, and he pulled out stuff that had to do with, you know, Gamergate and Zoe Quinn and all that. And there were some very sort of unguarded comments that journalists made in that. And he wrote a story as a big expose of this conspiracy, which, you know, which, having been on the inside of it, I did not think was a conspiracy, right? And so he became more famous because of that. And, you know, you can tell from the BuzzFeed story that ran just about a week or so ago that went into all of Milo's emails that they sort of parlayed this into creating the alt-right and to, you know, doing their darn best to get Donald Trump elected as president. So a very interesting connection between, you know, it's Milo in Gamergate, Milo with the alt-right, Milo with Donald Trump. And, you know, the Steve Bannon, you know, Breitbart's founder, was Donald Trump's chief of staff, right? So anyway, that's the connection, I guess.
So my hope is that this trend is the death cry of nasty old racists who see that they're a dying breed and that women and minorities and people of color are the future. Just that integrated, who cares if you're male or female or what color you are? Can you make a game? Can you write code? Can you do art? And I think that this trend, as you really, it is a trend, is rising concurrently with much more power, and the power is shifting in the gaming world and in the political world away from these men, and so they're kind of grabbing it back.
So you see it as like a death knell or something?
I see it as a death knell. That's my hopeful vision. Who else has a question or a comment? Yes.
Yeah.
So we talked about before about the super haters, the super fans, but specifically about what happened to Dean. The story itself, and I agree, people are idiots, assholes, whatever. But that did create space for people to argue. People who are not super haters or fans, other people, to think about and ask themselves, should a game journalist be a gamer? I'm not questioning you. You're a gamer long before then maybe I am alive. But for example, a game like Cuphead, it is extremely hard. It was made to be hard.
Right.
Do you think maybe there should, a game journalist to cover that kind of game should be a more hardcore gamer, maybe someone that plays that kind of game in order to talk about it? Is that something?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the phrase game journalist is just not very precise, right? And I can say that. But I have not, say, been day in and day out reviewing games for 20 years, right? I've been writing business stories and technology stories about games, going to preview events, playing the games for some. But my pattern is to play something for a few days and to move on. There are games that I get into and I play and I review. It's less frequently. I just did Shadow of War for about 60 hours and I did finish it, right? But we have other people who sort of tend to be the experts in particular areas. And so we had one of those guys, Mike Minotti. He finished Cuphead, and then he wrote the review of Cuphead. And that's the way it should be, right? If you're doing a formal review and you're giving it a review score, definitely you want someone who's skillful enough to actually see the whole game to review it. And there's no question about that. And we abide by that. You know, I was writing, I was sort of making a self-deprecating video that was a preview of Cuphead, right? And so we didn't apply the same rigor to whether I should be allowed to do that or not, right? I think there's always some value in showing people what a game is like before it comes out. In fact, if you've looked at sort of game marketing campaigns, they've stretched out for like, you know, a year now, right? And, you know, Assassin's Creed will probably have like a dozen trailers go up before the Assassin's Creed Origins game ships on October 27th. And, you know, it's just sort of part of the landscape. And so, but there is a very big difference in being able to just play a game at a preview and actually finish the whole thing. And so, yeah, it's...
Right now, there are games you cannot finish. Game as a service is a
yeah, that's a problem. That, you know, like we review a lot fewer MMOs than we do, you know, single player campaigns, right? And in that sort of case, we would say we played this MMO for 30 hours. Here's what the experience was like. And we would not actually give it a review score. We'd give our opinion of it and say whether this is worth your time or not. But you know, the review score part is something that is very hard to give for MMOs. And I imagine that you guys ran into this in creating MMOs, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But it's such an interesting question about what's the job of a game journalist, because it's, you know, you look at it in the context of the YouTube era and the Twitch era, and I think it goes back to, well, who is your audience? And as a product designer, because that's what I am at heart, I always go back to that. And if people want to attack me, I can say, you know what, this isn't for you. And so that's the thing, is if people want to spend their time attacking Dean for making a lighthearted, self-deprecating video, you kind of want to say, really, is that how you wanted? Like, why is it that that was worth your time? Where you could go online and find 50 YouTubers who could review it if you want, who are nerdy experts. So I think what's happened in journalism in general is that there's so many channels, there's so many different reviews, and there's reviews for kids, there's reviews for adults, there's professional journalists, there's, you know, YouTubers are on the rise, there's people who are doing stuff on Musical.ly and tearing it up. There's all these different channels and outlets. And so the people that decide they're going to attack somebody versus go find something else that's interesting to them and watch that, I think my point is that there's something going on with that person. It's not just journalism ethics, which was the thing they said, oh, it's about ethics in journalism. No, it's not. It's about being an asshole and wanting to attack someone. Because you could just go look somewhere else. It's not like there's 3 channels and you only have to look at one.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's some kind of expectations from a journalist. If you want to just see someone playing, and even doing a review about a game, you can find a YouTuber or even ask a colleague, a friend that already played the game, right? But when we're talking about a journalist, there's expectation that this is someone whose job is to do that, so they're supposed to do the best possible. When you go to a YouTube channel, that guy is just playing. It's not necessarily, it might be his income point, but not really a job. Like trained and you went to maybe journalism school, communications, to do that kind of job. So there's more expectations from a journalist than a regular YouTuber, I think. What do you think?
I don't know.
I think that's true. It's just, you know, the funny thing was is that we didn't sort of put enough context into our video on YouTube, right? We just had a couple lines describing it and saying this is shameful gameplay.
That's probably the real issue, right?
But we embedded this story, we embedded the video into a story that explained a fair amount of it more. But the story was also missing more of that context as well, that, you know, probably would have set everybody, or calmed everybody down in some way. But most people came into the story through a shitlord who tweeted about it and cut out two minutes of it, and then, you know, just sort of focused on the video for 2 minutes of the video. And so because it came, that was their context for getting into this story. And very few people actually came in through the story I had written, which had the video embedded in it. And so, you know, yes, there is a responsibility. Yes, we should add more context. Yes, we should explain exactly what this is. But we were sort of naive about posting this and not realizing that somebody else with their own agenda would sort of slam it and try to draw attention to themselves by you know, taking it out of context, right? So,
you know, there's a larger moral to this story, though, that's relevant for all of you, which is that if you find yourself with haters, you know, you're probably doing something interesting, because they're not going to bother unless they think they want a little bit of your juice. Yes?
On the general topic of how to respond to haters, there's lots of different kinds of haters attacking lots of different companies, different people. There's different responses. Like I was, you know, in your particular case, maybe you could find a game you're really good at and say, hey, look, I'm really good at this game. This is evidence that I'm that this shit poster is not accurate about my career and stuff. And I, you know, anyway, just the thought. Like, have you thought about maybe going?
Yeah, I mean, like the very next stories that I wrote about how I finished a couple of games that were popular games. Like I finished Knack 2, and then I finished Shadow of War as well. Cuphead is probably not a game that I can finish, but you know, I think everybody has different tastes, and you know, there's nothing. You know, like my reason for posting something like I did was that I think there's nothing invalid about taking a fresh look with a fresh eye at something, because it exposes you to things that might be problems that the people with the jaded eyes did not see. And if you're a jaded product designer who knows exactly who they're designing your product for, and you know, these people are jaded consumers as well, then you sort of miss the opportunity to reach people who are outside of that realm. You miss the opportunity to get noobs or newcomers or people who had never had an idea that this product might be useful to them. And so I think, you know, looking at something with a fresh eye is very instructive. And so that's one of the things we do regularly, like sort of your fresh look with no prior knowledge, you know. Like whether it's a game that you have no idea how to play, and then you're sort of analyzing the onboarding and how good it is, like how good was that tutorial for Cuphead? You know, I don't think that tutorial was outstanding. And that's the product design lesson there, is that, well, you know, you back that up and like, why did I have, you know, I'm not going to blame the product designer for the problems that I had, but you know, they should be aware that, you know, it's possible to make this mistake as you go into your product, and that those people who make this mistake are probably not going to stick with this product for very long, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a question about economics of the game industry. So you mentioned Shadow of War, and I saw a lot of reviews about that saying that there's a part in the single-player game where you have to basically put some more money into it to get past this real bad slog at the end. So I've noticed this trend of single-player games where they get to a point where you just need to put a bit more money than the $60 already had. So what are your thoughts on...
And that goes hand in hand with the news yesterday that, you know, Electronic Arts was closing Visceral games, right? And they were doing it because they were making a Star Wars game by Amy Hennig, the creator of Uncharted. And she was creating a single-player linear campaign game. They felt like in deciding to shut it down, that is not where the market is now. That they have in the past now praised a lot of games with live operations, you know, things like you know, loot crates or things that you can monetize for a long time. Like FIFA has Ultimate Teams, and Battlefield has ongoing downloadable content. And those games are making billions of dollars for Electronic Arts. And then they make this opportunity cost decision. They go, here's a team we have working on this game that is going to sell so many copies over a week and never be played again. And then it's just going to decline from there. So the choice for them is like, do we want this team to continue doing that or not? Now, Shadow of War kind of gets into this sort of like, did they sort of force people to buy loot crates by putting a key sort of part of the ending of the story behind 20 missions that were really difficult, grinding missions? You could get through those missions easier if you bought some things, but you could also just play them all the way through. And you know, Shadow of War has a campaign. It stretches across 60-something missions or so. But yeah, 20 of them had nothing to do with the story. But it was, you know, it was sort of like also an artifact of the way Shadow of War was designed, which was those 20 missions might be viewed as a grind, but they're actually very dynamic and fluid missions where, you know, the orcs that you take control of and capture, their personalities change over time. If you killed them once, they may come back as an undead orc and they may say something to you like, you know, you killed me the first time, but now I'm going to get you, or something like that. And so as you replay these kinds of missions, you get a different result. You get a different sort of story out of the orc captain that you're fighting against. And so they felt like, well, you know, for people who really love this system, they call it their nemesis system, this isn't a grind. This is actually the key part of what makes this game different and entertaining. And so to them, it wasn't a big deal to put the ending behind a bunch of these nemesis missions. And so, I don't know, it was an interesting choice that they made, but it forced players to, say, appreciate what you could get out of those 20 missions and the Nemesis system, right? So.
Right, and this is really touching on, to answer your larger question, the much larger scale trend going on in software and games, which is games as a service, software as a service, versus packaged software one time. And not everybody does that. You can still buy one-shot packaged software, but more and more what you're seeing are experiments with a service-based model. Often it involves some form of community or multiplayer environment, not always. And larger scale, that's what people want because, you know, recurring revenue versus a one-time revenue. So it's really a business decision. When it's well done, it benefits both the customer, the player, and the parent company. When it's poorly done, people don't buy into it and it doesn't succeed. But I think larger scale, when I look at the clients that come to me from all over the world and the business models they're developing, they're all service-based. Now, that's also because that's my specialty, you know, multiplayer. But I think large scale, if you're a developer, it's something you should absolutely be looking at. And I don't see that trend stopping or slowing down in the games industry. I see it accelerating. What about you, Dean?
Yeah, I am worried about something I would call managing by analyzing opportunity cost. And that is like, you know, Hollywood for a while, they realized that they were making $100 million or $90 million cost movies and getting $100 million profit. And they go, Jesus, this is not a good business, right? And they looked at games and they said, oh, we can make a game for 10 million bucks and make $100 million. So let's go make games. And so all the Hollywood companies start making games, right? Now mobile games come along and they see some of these mobile games can make $1 billion, right? You know, Supercell is a good example of a company that's made more than $1 billion in Clash of Clans and Clash Royale. And you know, you can make it for $2 million bucks, right? And so they go, oh, let's stop making those console games and let's go make mobile games now, right? And you can sort of see this sort of unending focus on the next opportunity, not realizing that the most entertaining thing should go back a ways to what you're originally doing, this original intellectual property. And so, you know, it doesn't mean that, say, mobile games are going to be more enjoyable than the movies that you were making at the very beginning, right?
There's another punchline, which is that it's not that hard to make a game. It's really, really hard to make a good game.
All right.
It's really hard.
All right. That's all for our scheduled time. Thank you very much, Amy and Dean. And thank you all for coming. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.